may be seated.
Counsel, good morning. And Attorney Morrow, Attorney Newhouse, you may call your first witness.
No, call my name, stand please.
If he needs a break, I told him he could just lean over and ask you.
Yes.
Okay, I thought so. Thank you.
Yeah, you're going to sit right here, but the judge is going to swear you in as soon as you get up on this top level here.
Can I sit down or not?
Let him swear you in first if you
If you
don't.
would raise your right hand. Do you swear the testimony you're about to give will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
Yes, I do.
You may be seated.
Good morning.
Good morning.
You're incredibly soft-spoken, and as I told you, this is a huge courtroom. There is a black microphone right there on the bench to the left of you, but I would ask if you can speak up so everyone can hear you. Would you please introduce yourself by stating your name and spelling your last name for the record?
My name is Miles Augustus Beam III. My last name is spelled B as in boy, E-A-M.
And in what city do you live, Mr. Bain?
I live in Raleigh, North Carolina.
Can you tell the court, please, what is your business, occupation, or profession?
I am an accident investigator focusing on recreational boat accidents.
And can you tell us how long you've been doing that approximately?
I've been involved in accident investigation of this type since approximately 1994.
Can you tell us generally what an accident reconstructionist does?
My job is I look at the physical evidence, which includes the damage to the vessels in the case of a collision, to determine the facts of the case of what happened, how the boats interacted, and what I can about vessel speed. And then I make my report to my client about my findings.
Do you look at other evidence as well besides the physical findings of the boat?
I look at what is available to me. Sometimes, for example, with regards to boat speed, there may be data stored in a computer chip related to related to boat speed that gives us somewhat of a black box type functionality, if you will, with regards to, boat speed as a function of time.
Do you look at other evidence as well that's available, such as witness statements or accident reports?
Yes, I'll look at any previous accident reports and statements that have been collected by the Coast Guard or local state agencies, such as DNR officers.
By whom are you employed, Mr. Bean?
I'm self-employed, and I'm retained on a case-by-case basis by various parties. It might be law firms or insurance companies. Again, it varies from case to case.
And how long have you been doing that?
I've been in this work since 1994.
Can you tell us, before you began doing this work, what was your previous employment?
I was an engineer at Underwriters Laboratories in the Marine Department of that facility, which is in Research Triangle Park, North Carolina, located just outside of Raleigh.
How long did you work for Underwriters Laboratory?
6 years.
And what sort of work did you do there?
I was a test engineer that set up test programs to evaluate products submitted by manufacturers to determine their compliance with various safety standards.
Can you tell us a little bit about your education, starting with post-high school? Can you tell us, did you go to college?
Yes, sir. I went to North Carolina State University in Raleigh, North Carolina, and got a degree in mechanical engineering.
And what year did you receive your degree in mechanical engineering?
I graduated in 1985.
And after that, did you obtain any licensure?
Yes, sir. I earned my professional engineer's license in 1990.
Can you tell us generally what's involved in that? Is that just graduating from school and taking a test, or are there things you have to do prior to that?
The fundamental requirement is to have an engineering degree, and beyond that, there's a certain number of years of work experience that's required. And then there is an exam that has to be passed.
So you had to go through some years of work experience between college and getting this licensure?
Yes. I think the minimum is 5 years.
I'm sorry?
I'm sorry, I think the minimum is 5 years.
5 years? And do you remember then when you were licensed as a professional engineer?
Yes, it was 1990.
So I'm not sure if I asked you this. Do you remember what years, can you tell us please, did you work for Underwriters Laboratories?
It was from 1988 to 1994.
So was it during the time that you worked at Underwriters Laboratories that you received your licensure as a professional engineer?
Yes, sir.
Are there classes or courses or continuing education requirements that you have to maintain that licensure, or is it once you get it, you have?
There are annual requirements for a certain number of continuing education requirements.
And have you met those to keep your license?
Yes, sir.
Do you belong to any professional associations?
I'm currently a member of an organization that writes and develops voluntary standards for the marine industry, known as the American Boat and Yacht Council.
The boat and
American Boat and Yacht Council.
Now, have you worked on any special projects during your employment with Underwriters Laboratory?
Yes, sir.
Can you tell us about that?
One of my largest projects was to conduct research on how to reconstruct boat accidents, in particular collisions, based on physical evidence. And that was a 3-year study that was funded by the Coast Guard. And I was the lead engineer on the project that handled that.
So the Coast Guard basically funded a study done by Underwriter Laboratory,
Yes, sir.
and you were the lead engineer on that project?
Yes, sir.
Can you tell us, have you done work in a number of jurisdictions?
I've worked in a number of states.
Have you also worked outside of the United States?
Yes, sir. I was employed or retained by the government of New South Wales in Australia
For what, please?
to do an accident investigation and reconstruction of a collision in Sydney Harbor between a ferry and a private yacht.
So since you've been working for yourself, has accident reconstruction been primarily what you do for a living?
Yes, sir.
Now, besides the things that we've talked about, have you also been a teacher or presenter at any courses, seminars, anything like that?
Yes, sir.
Can you tell us about that, please?
The National Association of State Boating Law Administrators, organization referred to as NASBLA, has continued a project that was started by UL, which is a course designed to teach advanced investigation techniques to law enforcement officers to help them identify causes of boat accidents. Not just collisions,
What
but
was your
fire
involvement in
accidents.
that?
Originally, I helped develop some of the material for that, and I was one of the instructors initially.
Have you presented materials at any other courses for lawyers or other professionals?
I've been a guest speaker at continuing education conferences for lawyers practicing in the Marine area. I gave a presentation to a group of lawyers in Charleston, South Carolina on the current state of the art of boat accident reconstruction.
Have you testified before in court as an expert witness on accident reconstruction?
Yes, sir.
Can you tell us, have you testified in both civil and criminal trials, or just one or the other?
Both.
Have you testified in criminal trials for both the prosecution and the defense, or just one or the other?
Both.
And how about in civil cases? Have you testified for the plaintiff, for the defendant, or for both?
Both.
Can you talk to us specifically now about this case? First of all, were you engaged to perform an accident reconstruction in this case?
Yes, sir.
By whom?
By the law office of Lynn Merrill.
And can you tell us then, please, did you review materials as part of the accident reconstruction that you performed?
Yes, sir.
Can you tell us what materials that you reviewed?
I was provided a list of materials that was quite extensive by Ms. Merrill's office, which included photographs, reports from state agencies of their investigation.
Are those items listed anywhere?
A list of those items can be found in the report that I presented as Attachment A.
So attachment A to your report lists those materials?
Yes, sir.
Besides reviewing those materials, can you tell the court what, if anything else, that you did as part of an accident reconstruction?
I traveled to Ohio to do an inspection of the boats after the accident, and I worked with a firm that I subcontracted to supervise the gathering of data through a technique called 3D laser scanning.
I'm going to ask you to keep your voice up because I see Kathy leaning in towards you and she's right next to you. So tell us again about that. You engaged a firm
To perform a type of data collection known as 3D laser scanning
And what's the use or purpose of that when it comes to accident reconstruction?
We gather data that can be used to literally rebuild the boat inside the computer. And with that data, we can manipulate it and determine how, the boats interacted with each other much easier.
Okay, when you say manipulate the data, tell us what you mean by that.
I mean simply alter the orientation of the boats in the computer so we can see them from different angles. We can take measurements of certain things that are hard to get to, maybe physically, on the real boat. We can get those with great precision in the computer using the data that was scanned.
All right. So did you come to Ohio to physically view the Bayliner that was owned by Joseph Yurich in this case?
Yes, sir.
Did you come to Ohio to view the Bassmaster that was owned by Mr. Bruce Lindenwood in connection with this case?
Yes, sir.
And you engaged this firm to do these scans that you talked about earlier, is that right?
Yes, sir.
Were you present when those scans were conducted?
Yes, sir.
Is there a general method or methodology that you use to ensure that the results of your accident reconstruction can be relied upon? You just sort of describe for the court if there's such a process.
Well, the general steps to the process are to review the data provided by the law firm on what documentation has been collected to that point, the vessel inspections, and then documentation of the damage to the vessels. And in this case, and some other cases, I've done the 3D scanning so that we can work with the models in the computer. In the days before this technology was available, it was not uncommon to use forklifts and other types of equipment to literally move the boats around physically to try to help match up particular points of each vessel that came in contact with each other. That was a somewhat difficult and dangerous process, as you might imagine.
So this computerized process sort of takes the place of that physical moving of the boats to line them up with the damage?
It does.
May I approach?
Yes.
Thank you.
Oh, yes.
Steve, I've handed you what we've marked for identification purposes as Defendant's Exhibit Y. Can you tell the court, please, first of all, when you came to Ohio and viewed, let's start with the Bassmaster, did you and your subcontractor take a number of photographs?
Yes, sir.
Have you since reviewed those photographs?
Yes.
And did you use those photographs as part of formulating an opinion in this case?
Yes, sir.
In addition to your own physical viewing, is that right?
That's right.
Okay. Have you reviewed all those photographs to make certain, and can you tell us, do those photographs fairly and accurately depict the Bassmaster as you saw it in Ohio when you came up here?
Yes, sir.
Did you likewise, when you came to Ohio, take photographs of Dr. Yurich's Bayliner 185?
Yes, sir.
And have you since reviewed those photographs?
Yes, sir.
Did you use those photographs in addition to your personal observations in formulating the opinions you've arrived at?
Yes, sir.
Do the photographs of Dr. Yurich's Bayliner fairly and accurately depict the Bayliner as you saw it when you came to Ohio?
Yes, sir.
In addition, did you prepare or have prepared under your direction a number of reproductions based upon the scans that were taken?
Yes, sir.
And have you likewise reviewed all of those to make certain that they fairly and accurately depict the scans that were computer generated?
Yes, sir.
And then finally, there were several photographs that you specifically selected separately, I think 7 photographs. Do you recall that?
Yes, sir.
Those were photographs of one boat, the other boat, or both of them?
Photographs of both boats,
Right.
Joseph.
And you selected those photographs separately, correct?
Yes, sir.
Have you reviewed those photographs to make certain that they fairly and accurately depict the boats as you saw them?
Yes, sir.
And do they?
Yes, sir.
Exhibit Y contains all of these items that we've discovered. Have you reviewed all those items to make sure that they fairly and accurately depict what's portrayed in them?
Yes, sir.
And do they?
Yes, sir.
Now, of those scans, did you select several today for purposes of illustrating your testimony?
Yes, sir.
Tell me where it's most convenient for you if I put this.
Start with closer.
Okay. That's a start.
If I put it up here so you and the judge can see it, does that work?
That's fine, sir.
Now on this board, which we have marked as Defendant's Exhibit Z,
Can you tell the court, first of all, just generally what's on there? That is the number of items and a general description of the items.
All right, we have 6 items on the board here.
And what are those? Are those photographs or those scans? What are they, please?
These are different views of the boats from the scan data that was taken. And we'll begin with the upper left and go through the sequence, if that's all right.
Okay, are they placed on the board then in sequence?
Yes, sir.
Okay, and so in the sequence, can you tell the court, and since we're making a record, I want to identify it verbally, which of those 6 is the first in the sequence?
All right, this one at the upper left.
Okay, so the first one up in the upper left-hand corner?
Yes, sir.
And can you tell the court that scan was generated as you had described earlier from the damage?
The scans of each individual boat are from the items that you're looking at, the top-down view of the boats that were created from the scans of the individual boats. The position of the boats relative to each other is based on what we established as the general impact orientation prior to the collision, and based on physical data as well as witness statements.
Okay. Now, do you do anything to fix the position of those boats relative to north, south, east, and west, or is your concern more the boats relative to each other?
The primary focus is the boats relative to each other. In this particular case, I wasn't asked to try to ascertain the direction of each vessel in regards to a north-south or east-west type of grid.
All right. So directing your attention back then to the first of those photographs, the one in the upper left, or excuse me, first of those scans, the one in the upper left. Can you tell the court, please, what that scan represents and what the significance of it is to your findings and conclusions?
The boat that is higher in the photograph is a top view of the bayliner of Dr. Yurich's boat approaching the general area of where the bass boat is located. Perhaps the most significant thing is that the bass boat is oriented in the direction of travel that leaves the bayliner to its starboard side.
And why is that significant?
It's significant because according to the navigation rules, the boat which is to the starboard side of a vessel is what's referred to as the stand-on vessel, and you become the giveaway vessel, which means you have to yield to the course of the other boat. So in this case, the bayliner is considered the stand-on vessel, which means that the bass boat would have to yield change its course in order to avoid being in the path of the bayliner.
Because the bayliner is to the starboard side of the bass
Yes,
boat.
because the bayliner is to the starboard side of the bass boat.
All right. Is there anything else of significance to your opinions and conclusions with regard to the first of those scans, or should we move on?
You can move on. I think
Okay.
that those are the main things.
All right. Then could you tell us by describing its position on the board, what's the next scan in the sequence?
The photo that's in the upper right, and again, this is a top-down view. The individual boats, just as in the previous photograph, are generated from the computer scan data. The orientation of the vessels is my analysis as to how they appeared at first contact, with the bow of the bass boat making contact with the port side near the bow of the bayliner. And I'm pointing to that if you can see it. It's in this area.
So the starboard side of the bass boat makes contact with the port side of the bayliner.
Yes, sir. We describe it more as the nose, the most forward projection of the bass boat that makes that contact initially.
Is there anything else of significance to that scan relative to your conclusions that we need to discuss?
It does show the distortion beginning to take place on the hull of the bass boat.
Can I stop you there for a second and ask you, do you recall the construction of the bass boat? And when I say construction, what material was it constructed of?
The bass boat is made from metal. It appeared to be a type of aluminum.
And how about the bayliner?
The bayliner was fiberglass.
So you were, with reference to that upper right-hand scan, you were starting to talk about the distortion. Can you describe for the court what you mean by that distortion and how it would occur?
The damage to the bass boat after the collision showed that the bow of the boat had actually been displaced from one side to the other slightly. In simple layman's terms, it was bent to one side, and in the process of bending that bow to one side, it caused the port side of the bass boat to be deformed, and I'll describe it as crumpled. It's what happens when you get a structure, especially a metal structure, under compression. The material buckles and distorts. And in
Give
doing
us sort of an
so,
everyday example of how that happens?
if, for example, you take an empty soda can and you were to step on it, if you started and got and started to smush it a little bit, what you would see before you smashed it to turn into a pancake size, round disc, the sides of that soda can would be bent in and out and different types of shapes that occurred because of that buckling. And they may be bent inward even though you didn't press directly on the sides of that can. And this is a similar phenomenon.
So if I understand you, you're stepping on top of the soda can, it may bend in and out on the sides even if you're not putting pressure directly on the sides.
That's right.
Okay. Is there anything else with regard to the second scan that we need to talk about concerning your opinions or conclusions?
The general orientation of the vessels and the way the impact initially occurs is going to create a fairly rapid rotation of the bass boat because the initial impact force is on the bow of the bass boat, directed somewhat from the side.
This is not, if I can interrupt you, sort of like a T-bone crash that we would think of in an automobile accident. Is that right?
That's right.
Now, can I ask you, as part of your work in this case, have you had a chance to review the report prepared by the state's accident reconstructionist, Mr. McCullough?
Yes, sir.
Do you have general agreement with Mr. McCullough's angle of approach of each of the boats relative to each other, or do you not? In other words, do you agree with his assessment, or do you not?
I'd like to see the diagram again that you're referring to that describes his assessment.
Yeah, approach?
Yes.
Thank you. I've handed you 3 diagrams. They've been previously marked as defendant's exhibits R, S, and T. Would you take a moment to look at those, and then when you finish, just look up and let me know that you've finished?
Yes, sir.
Thank you. Okay?
Yes, sir.
All right, let's start, please, if we can, first with defendant's exhibit R. Can you describe for the court generally what's depicted in that exhibit?
The bayliner is on a course that is in a general northeast direction, approaching the bass boat, which would be pointed due south, assuming that north is pointed vertically straight up. And it shows the bow of the bayliner on the port side hitting the nose or the foremost section of the bass boat.
All right, so let's break that down. First of all, do you agree with the general directional orientation, assuming the bass boat is facing south?
I agree with the general path and orientation of the vessels relative to each other. But as we discussed earlier, I did not do an analysis to try to establish the direction of each vessel individually as it relates to, say, a compass heading.
All right. In the course of reviewing Mr. McCullough's report, do you recall that he listed an angle of, approximate angle of impact between the two boats?
I remember seeing a diagram to that effect. I don't recall the number.
Okay. The next exhibit, I think, is exhibit, was it S?
Yes, I have an exhibit S.
Is it S?
Yes, sir, I have,
All right.
I have an answer.
Can you tell the court and describe for the record generally what's depicted in defendant's exhibit S?
It's consistent with what we've already discussed with the port side of the bay liner near the bow coming in contact with the nose of the bass boat. In this diagram, it's pretty clear that the nose of the bass boat penetrated, shows it penetrating some distance into the bay liner. And he also indicates that the bass boat is rotating, so the nose is being pushed away from the bass boat's nose is being pushed away from the bay liner as the bay liner, continues on its course for some distance.
Okay. And did your reconstruction effort, did it agree with the fact that the bass boat was pushed into a spin?
Yes.
And now, if you would, exhibit T.
Yes, sir, I have it.
I'm going to put this up. Does this appear to be a, let's take this one down first. Does this appear to be a blow up of exhibit, is it T?
Yes, sir. That's T. Yes, sir.
Now, tell us, please, generally what's depicted in this exhibit.
It shows the vessels in the relative position to each other that we've discussed before. And this time it also shows the US 224 overpass, the bridge that travels over the lake in that location. And it shows that the bay liner and the bass tracker are to the north of the bridge. The bay liner is headed due south.
And did you read things in preparation of your accident reconstruction that suggested that the bay liner was heading in a southerly direction when the accident happened?
I don't recall specifically because I wasn't looking for that. I was concerned only with the relative position of the vessels.
Okay. If you assume from that picture that north is the top, and so the bay liner is traveling in a southerly direction, do you agree with or disagree with the orientation of the boats as shown in that exhibit, exhibit T?
I agree with the general layout, yes. I'd like to clarify that in one term. That is in my analysis, the orientation of the bass tracker was closer to an orientation that would represent closer to a head-on orientation, instead of being something that, in this case, in the diagram, it shows the stern of the vessel being presented more towards the bow. In my analysis, the nose of the bass tracker was pointed more in a direct, just say closer to a head-on orientation to the bayliner.
But this orientation in Exhibit T, can you tell us, with reference to that navigation rule that you talked about earlier, which vessel would be the vessel that would have the right of way and why?
Objection. Already testified to.
Overruled.
This shows a crossing situation, and the bayliner is still to the starboard of the bass tracker, which indicates that the bayliner is referred to as the stand-on vessel, and the bass tracker is the vessel which would have to yield to the bayliner.
I'm going to place up here again Defendant's Exhibit Z, and that's the one that's got the scans, am I correct?
The one in the lower right, is that the one you're referring to?
No, actually, I'm just trying to refer to the fact for the record that we're putting back up in front of you something that you saw before, which is Exhibit Z, correct? It's up in the upper right hand.
Yes, sir.
And that has the 6 scans that you were testifying about previously, correct?
Yes, sir.
Okay. I think we left off actually with number 2, the one in the upper right-hand corner. Is there anything else about that scan that's pertinent to your conclusions or your testimony here today, or can we move on?
I think we can move on.
Okay. And can you tell us then, by its position on the board, which one would be next in the sequence?
The middle one in the first column.
Okay, so on the middle one on the left?
Yes, sir.
All right. And can you describe generally what is depicted in that scan? Need me to move that closer to you?
If you don't mind.
May I, Your Honor?
You may.
Thank you.
It may just be the position with the glare.
Glare? Okay.
Trying to get it so everybody can. Can you see that better now?
Yes, sir. That's much better. Thank you.
Okay.
Just going to ask you, since you're leaning up, to keep your voice up so that we can all hear you.
So can you describe for us, please, what's portrayed in that scan?
In this scan, the nose of the bass boat is making contact with the port side of the bow of the bayliner. The buckling of the sides of the bass boat is becoming apparent in this photo. It's clear in this diagram that the side of the hull of the bayliner has been penetrated at this point.
And are you able to tell from your reconstruction what it is about the bass boat that penetrated the bayliner?
There's an aluminum plate that is fastened to the top of the bass boat right at the bow. That area of the bass boat penetrated the hull of the bayliner.
This may be difficult. I'm going to ask you to do your best with it. Can you give us an idea of the timing or the sequence? Like how quickly would all this have been going on?
Would have happened very, very quickly. Fractions of a second, most likely.
All right, is there anything else about the third scan that we need to talk about in relation to your opinions or your testimony here today?
Not that we haven't covered, no, sir.
All right, thank you. Can you tell us then, please, in the sequence, by describing its position on the board, what is the next scan in the sequence?
The middle diagram on the second column.
Okay, so on the right?
Yes, sir.
All right, and can you describe, please, for the court and for the record, generally what's portrayed in that scan?
In this scan, the collision has progressed just slightly further than it was in the previous scan. And this is the biggest difference is this is a top-down view of the boats in the early stages of contact, whereas the other one was more of a perspective viewpoint. In this view, it's very apparent that the very tip of the bass boat has been pushed to the port side of the center line, and that's begun to cause significant distortion to the sides of the bass boat. Don't know that it's clear on the diagram, but it's certainly at this point, if not before, the bass boat would have begun fairly rapid rotation to the bow would have rotated to port of the center line. Or said another way, the boat is rotating counterclockwise from the top-down view.
Are you able to tell us to a reasonable degree of engineering certainty what would happen if there were occupants in that bass boat, assuming they weren't fastened to their seats?
Yes, sir.
What would that be?
In general, the tendency would have been for the bass boat to literally move out from under the occupants.
So it's less a question of being ejected and really being ejected sort of because the boat, your ground moves out from under you, is that what you're saying?
Yes, sir.
Is there anything else of significance to this fourth scan to your testimony here today or the opinions you've rendered?
Not at this time. I can't tell anything else.
All right. And then how about what is the fifth scan? Can you tell us what that is?
The lower left photograph or diagram.
And what is depicted in that scan?
In this scan, we see the boat interaction continuing to the next phase. So the collision occurs in terms of the interaction of the boats, how they contact each other somewhat in phases. There's an initial contact, which mostly is what we've talked about so far in the early stages. And during that early phases of contact, we see the penetration of the bass boat into the bow of the bayliner. As the collision sequence progresses, the bayliner pushes the nose of the bass boat to the bass boat's port side. In addition to causing the bass boat to rotate, it brings the starboard side of the bow of the bass boat in contact with the bayliner in such a way that the bayliner hull actually, it meets the bass boat in such a way that the bass boat conforms to the bayliner, sort of wraps itself around the bow a little bit. And as that happens, the two for a brief moment are at one point they're moving together. And as the bass boat continues to be rotated, the stern of the two vessels starts to get closer together. And as that happens, there's a point at which it's difficult to describe, but the starboard side of the bass boat, some distance back from the nose, has to break away. Can't pivot, but so far it's very much like the effect you would have if you're in your workshop and you're working with a wood saw and you want to get the saw unstuck from the groove it's in. You push down on the handle so the saw blade pivots around where you've stopped cutting. And that's very much what happens here. Is there's a hole in a big gash in the side of the bayliner, and that bass boat can only pivot next to it so far before the two break apart from each other. And that's the part of the collision sequence we refer to as separation or disengagement.
I asked you a couple of minutes ago about what would happen to the passengers assuming they were not secured to their seats during this collision. Is there a sort of an everyday example, like earlier you used the pop can example to describe to us this crushing that took place, or this formation that took place on the bass boat. Is there an everyday example you can use that would help explain what would happen with the passengers?
Yes, sir. It's very much, I'm sure most people have seen the illustration where somebody can yank the tablecloth out from under a dish or a napkin out from under a cup that it's sitting on. And it's very much that kind of effect.
And is that, and the boat being forced rapidly and violently in one direction would sort of be like yanking the tablecloth, is that it?
Very much so.
And the passengers would sort of be like whatever's on the
It
table?
would be much like the cup or the glass on the napkin.
The fifth of those scans, is there anything else that scan tells you in terms of the positions or elevations of the boats relative to each other?
Not that's readily apparent from the top-down view that this shows.
All right, and then I believe that I'm sorry, is there anything else that we need to discuss about the fifth scan relative to your opinions or conclusions?
No, sir.
Then there's the sixth of the scans on Defendant's Exhibit C. That's the one in the lower right-hand corner, am I correct?
Yes, sir.
Can you describe for the court and for the record, please, what's portrayed in that scan?
This is a perspective view of the vessels early in the collision phase, but after the penetration of the side of the bayliner by the bass boat. And it's from a perspective of somewhat looking up from the bottom, as if you were underwater watching this thing happen. And what it shows here is that in this view it appears that bass boat's bow is depressed. The gunnels of the two boats, the gunnel being the top of the side of the boats, is oriented such that the gunnel of the bayliner is above the gunnels of the bass boat, which is a complex way of saying it looks like the bass boat's sitting a little higher than the bayliner's sitting a little higher than the bass boat.
And is there anything about the accident that causes the nose or the bow of the bass boat to depress or go down in any way?
The curvature of the bow of the bayliner is such that it would tend to deflect the bass boat's bow downward.
When you say the curvature, are you talking about the curvature looking at the deck from the top down, or are you talking about the curvature looking from the gunnel down to the keel?
If you were to stand in line with the center line of the bayliner and look at a cross section, what you would get if we were to slice it across like a piece of pie, you would look at that would tend to depress the bow of the bass boat as the bass boat gets, I don't want to say underneath, but I'll say as the bow of the bayliner starts to ride over the bow of the bass boat. And again, I'm just talking about that, that first tip of the bass boat being deflected downward some.
So the curvature of the bass boat is basically pushing the nose down, is that what you're saying?
The curvature of the bayliner bow
I'm
is
sorry.
pushing just the nose of the bass boat down slightly.
Is this a quick process or a long drawn out process?
It would still be fairly quick. It would still be fractions of a second.
May I approach your Honor?
You have continuing permission to.
Oh, thank you. I'm going to hand you now what we've marked as defendants exhibits AA through EE. If you wouldn't mind, just take a moment and go through each of those, and then when you finish, please look up and let me know.
Orange.
still need that diagram.
No, you want me to take that down? Yeah.
All right, sir.
He said okay.
Okay, have you finished?
Yes, sir.
I'm sorry. Can you, I mentioned earlier that when we were identifying the disc, which I believe is Defendant's Exhibit Y, there were some photographs that you particularly wanted singled out, correct?
Yes, sir.
Are those photographs, exhibits AA through EE?
Yes, sir.
Let's start, if we can, with AA. Would you tell the court, please, just generally what's depicted in AA?
I might need you to locate that one for me.
Is there? I don't know that. I will ask Brian if okay. Yeah, I don't think they generally do.
All right, sir. I have a AA.
All right. I'm going to take that from you if I can, and we're going to try to put it up on the Elmo and see if that helps. So this is Defendant's Exhibit AA. Are you able to see that okay from over there?
Yes, sir.
All right. Can you tell the court, first of all, which of the two boats is depicted?
This is the Bayliner.
All right. And tell the court and the record which side of the Bayliner is depicted in this photo.
We're looking at the port side of the bow of the Bayliner.
And then what is the significance of this photo, or what's portrayed in this photo that's of significance to your opinions?
This photo shows the area where the bow of the bass boat penetrated in the initial contact early in the collision.
Okay. Now, as a result of what you see here and the other things that you found, are you able to tell us to a reasonable degree of engineering certainty how that bass boat penetrated, as you described earlier?
Can you clarify by what you mean by how?
Well, can you give us, we've been using some sort of everyday examples like pop cans and tablecloths. Is there something that you can use to describe for us how this penetration took place?
Yes, sir, the let's see if I can do it this way. The shape of the outline of what you see here, this area is, it's almost shaped like a triangle. This top line is fairly close to horizontal parallel with the water line. This section over here, kind of on the bottom, and then it meets at a point, forming a triangle. This section of fiberglass here in the middle was pushed out of the way. It was pushed inward when the bow of the bass boat penetrated into the bay liner. And this gash here is created by the penetration, and the gash grows longer as the bass boat gets deeper and deeper into the side of the hull. And because it's triangular shaped, it has that effect. It's basically, if you were to take a triangle, there's something that's shaped like a piece of pizza, and push it through a piece of cardboard, the deeper you go as that triangle gets wider, the longer this line that it creates because of the penetration. So that's really what we have here, is a triangle in the shape of being the nose of the bass boat, penetrating the side of this bay liner, and the further it penetrates, the longer the gash here becomes, because the wider the bass boat becomes, the further back you go.
Is there a way to tell with a reasonable degree of engineering certainty how far the bass boat penetrated, or can you not tell?
It's possible to tell that. I did not provide that value specifically, but it would be easy to get it from the computer.
Is there anything else about the placement of that damage on the bay liner that is of significance to your opinions or conclusions?
The location of the damage here is on the side of the bay liner. It's not exactly at the center line. In other words, I was looking for information to determine if this was something closer to, say, a glancing blow, as opposed to an override where one vessel rides over the top of the other. And if this had been an override type of an accident, the damage that we see here, we would have seen some type of similar damage of gouges and material transfer, broken fiberglass right along the center line of the bay liner, but it isn't there.
When you say the center line of the bay liner, are you talking about up in this area? Or down here? I'm trying to figure out when you say center.
By center line, I'm talking about the part of the bay liner that you would cut it as if you cut it in half, so you had two equal halves. Just like you would cut a piece of pie in half, where you have two sides the same.
You had mentioned earlier that these two boats sort of stayed together for a bit. You used the example of the saw getting caught in wood. You recall that?
Yes, sir.
Is there anything about this damage that helps you or disputes that?
Not necessarily.
Okay. You've read the report, Mr. McCullough indicating or suggesting that this bayliner was on plane when this collision occurred, correct?
Yes, sir.
Do you agree with that assessment or do you not?
I don't believe there's enough information to say that it was for sure on plane. I think that after reading his report, that his assumption that it was on plane was based on a false assumption that he made about the way that the damage to the side of the bayliner was made.
This damage that we're looking at here in Defense Exhibit AA?
Yes, especially this top part here.
Okay.
This top part, as I mentioned, it looks like it's mostly possibly parallel to the water line.
Uh-huh.
And I believe the assumption was made that he made was that the bayliner was level with the water and that line was, that gash was created as the bass boat, he believes, was stationary, and this bayliner went past the point of the bass boat.
So why do you say that's a false assumption?
Because he assumed that gash had to be made in that manner, but there was the other way that it could be made was what we just went through with the triangle going through the piece of cardboard, the pizza slice example, where the further it penetrates, the wider the line gets, and that's what we have. I'm convinced this is what we have here.
So are you saying this damage could have been caused even though the bayliner was in transition?
Let me answer that a slightly different way. I would say that the bayliner could have experienced that damage without having to be parallel with the water line, without having to be on plane.
Are you able to explain or show us how that can be?
Trying to think of a simple example. Is there a board we can use?
There's a blackboard.
Okay. Might work.
Just a little bit out from the side. Wherever you're comfortable drawing. Yes, so if you could, the prosecutors are over there so they can see what you're doing. If you just keep your voice up to tell them, if in case you're talking while you're doing this, to show the judge what you're doing. Can you clarify for me?
Your Honor.
If you are able perhaps to switch positions so Kathy can,
Can you come over here so Kathy will be able to hear you better?
Can you clarify for me what you're asking me to do?
Yeah. If I understand your testimony, you're saying that the conclusion of the state's reconstructionist that the boat was on plane is premised on a false assumption. correct?
Yes.
And that this damage could be caused without the boat necessarily being on plane, correct?
Yes.
Okay. So, however you're comfortable doing, is there something you can do to show the court what you mean by how that could have been caused without it being on plane? Can you even move this?
Move this one, it's not that a little further back.
Yeah.
I'm just drawing water line here. This is top surface of the water. Water is the best in the world.
I'm sorry.
But we have a situation
John.
where the,
You need to speak up. The judge cannot hear you. He's not that far away, neither can Kathy. All right, you get what the one on the left represents. What's the one on the right represent?
just step back away so you can see it.
Keep your voice up, please.
All right. Okay, we've got the profile. Look at the side view of the baler and look to the water. The boat to the right is the bass boat. And I've given you a top-down view of the bass boat here, showing the bow of the bass boat being pointed toward your view. I didn't know at exactly the right height, but I believe that the state's investigation assumed that this gash was made when the bow of the baler went by the nose of the bass boat, scraping against the taking this gash. Now, the way I've drawn it here is just for illustration purposes. It isn't meant to show you correct orientation and collision took place. In this drawing, we're looking at the starboard side of the baler, but of course the damage is to the port side. I'm just trying to illustrate the manner in which I think he believed that such damage occurred. So this action would have taken place with the port side of the baler rubbing against the nose of the bass boat. But in this case, the idea is that the bass boat would have been, the nose would have been pointed toward the side of the baler, and that gash was created as it rode by it. He believes that's how that horizontal line, the horizontal gash was created. But I believe what he didn't consider was that this gash could have been created as the bass boat penetrated the side of the baler, which I've discussed over there.
All right. Does that explain the difference between his assumption and why you're saying it's a false assumption?
Yes.
Okay. Go ahead. Have a seat.
He also said that if the boat had been, if the baler had been on a plane, and it had to be on a plane because it was level,
Because the damage was level?
Because it's above the actual level. Did I answer your question, sir?
Yes.
Need some,
I think
he poured you some water. Oh,
very good.
yes. Right.
Does he need more water?
Mr. Bean, can you say to a reasonable degree of scientific certainty whether or not the bay line was on a plane one way or the other, or is it not possible to do that?
I didn't feel I had enough information to say conclusively whether it was or wasn't.
From the information you had available, is it possible to determine, or is it not, to a reasonable degree of scientific certainty where there was a point of impact? In other words, is there a one point where the boats came in contact?
Depends on how you define point.
Okay? How do you define a point?
In a case like this, I would think a point is going to be a relatively small area. It's not going to be a point like a pinpoint, as you know, the head of a pin or something. It's not going to be that small.
Okay?
It would be an area.
You able to give us some idea about how big that area might be?
Roughly the outline of, you know, say the palm of your hand, or if you ball up your fist, maybe the front face of a fist like this. So maybe an inch by 3 inch square, something of that nature.
Are you able to tell us with a reasonable degree of scientific, of engineering certainty, what the speed was of the bayliner at the time of the collision?
No, sir, I didn't find enough information to quantify that to a small value.
Okay. Are you able to give the court, to a reasonable degree of engineering certainty, a range that the bayliner could have been traveling?
A range.
Well, let me ask you this first, before we go there. We've heard some talk about planing, and you've talked a little bit about planing. Were you able to find any scientific studies or engineering studies that had been done to determine a planing speed for the bayliner 185?
There was some tests done by one of the boat magazines where they did record time to plane and the boat's time to reach 30 miles per hour from a dead stop.
That was done by a boat magazine.
Yeah, it was and referred to as boattest.com.
So, based upon the information you were able to gather, is it possible or is it not possible to tell us to a reasonable degree of engineering certainty a range between which this boat could have been traveling in terms of miles per hour?
between X and Y miles per hour.
Using their data, it suggests that the minimum plating speed of the boat would have been in the neighborhood of 10 to 13 miles per hour, as far as minimum plating speed.
Now, we've heard some testimony earlier in this trial about different phases that a boat goes through as it accelerates. So as to not belabor this too long, do you agree that there are 3 phases that a boat goes through?
Yes,
Beginning with idling?
idling or dead stop, yes.
Okay. And then what's the next phase?
The next phase would be the beginning of a plane, which is as the boat starts to move forward, it begins to rise out of the water. As that happens, it moves from what we refer to as a displacement hull, where the boat's weight is supported on top of the water solely by the boat pushing water aside, which means it's what we call buoyancy. It's what allows things to float. As the speed of the boat increases, the water is deflected downward by the hull, and it provides the lift to keep the boat up on top of the water. It's a common example that you see of that frequently would be water skis. Water skis keep the water skier up by planing on the water, not by the buoyancy of the water ski, because the water ski doesn't have much buoyancy. So that's the idea I'm trying to convey here.
All right. And is there a name given to that phase between idling and planing?
There is what we refer to as a transition phase, where the boat goes from sitting level in the water, stationary. It goes from being a displacement hull to being the boat on plane. And that is referred to as a transition phase. Some people refer to it as getting over the hump.
Some people refer to it as placing.
Getting over the hump.
Getting over the hump? All right. Now, is there a magical number for every boat where it just goes from transition and then 1 mile an hour faster, it's on planing, or is it not that precise?
It's not that precise. Planing is a fairly subjective term. It's because there are various degrees of being on plane, if you will. It's a judgment as to whether or not you would decide if a boat is on plane or not.
Are you able to tell us to a reasonable degree of engineering certainty if the bass boat was moving at all during immediately before the collision?
I can tell you that I did not see convincing evidence that it was moving at what I'm going to describe as a significant rate of speed compared to the Bayliner. And again, I can't put a hard number on that. But if the bass boat had been moving at say a speed of 10, 15, 20 miles per hour, I believe I would have seen evidence of that. I didn't find it.
All right. Is there anything that you can tell us about whether it was moving at all or whether it was stationary?
If it was moving slowly.
Okay. Judge?
Yes.
I have maybe 10 minutes. Do you want Kathy to break?
Yeah, I think good opportunity for our morning recess. We'll come back here in about 15 minutes. Thank you.
All right. Court is in recess.
Attorney Uhas.
Thank you, Your Honor.
Mr. Beagle, if I can, I want to direct your attention again back to the screen, the Elmo, and I'm handing you what we've marked as Defendant's Exhibit Double B. Do you recognize that photograph?
Yes, sir.
I'm asking you to keep your voice up again.
Yes, sir.
Thank you. Is that a photograph of the Bayliner?
Yes, sir.
And does that fairly and accurately depict the damage that you saw when you came to Ohio and viewed the boat?
Yes, sir.
There's actually an area here where you can sort of see all the way through to daylight, is that right?
That's right.
And did you view that damage also from the top side of the boat down?
Yes, sir.
You had mentioned earlier that some of this fiberglass was pushed back or displaced, I believe, is that right?
Yes, sir.
Could you see that when you looked at it from the top down?
Yes, sir.
I'm placing on the Elmo and up on the screen is Defendant's Exhibit Double C. Do you recognize that photograph?
Yes, sir.
Can you tell us, please, what's depicted in that photograph?
This is the forward area, the bow of the bass boat. The black objects you see laying on the deck of the bass boat are, I believe, parts of the trolling motor.
Now, on this bass boat, can you tell us, did you observe any marks or striations?
Is that all?
On the bass boat, did you observe any marks or striations?
Yes, sir.
Do those marks or striations tell you anything in engineering terms about what may have happened during the collision between the boats?
Yes, they do.
And can you describe for us the nature of the striations that you saw?
The most prominent striations on the bass boat are actually captured in that photograph.
Okay.
The bow plate I referred to several times is this area in here, this piece. And you can see striations and transfer marks that go in this direction. And they start here and go all the way back to this area and beyond. Some of them are obscured by this mount.
Are they the marks down here where I'm pointing with my pen?
Yes, in that area.
Okay. And you say they go back this way?
Well, direction of travel is across, but they do go back fairly far on the gunnel, on the top of the side, to what would be about right here.
And what, if anything, does that tell you about the relative speeds of the boat? The boats, excuse me.
What we get out of that is we get an impact angle, which is, I believe, how the DNR came up with their value, was to measure the angle of those marks relative to the center line. And could you repeat your question, please?
Well, let me ask you another question then. Did your opinions or conclusions vary materially from the DNR conclusions when it comes to the angle that the boats struck each other?
No, sir. My answer was approximately the same as theirs,
Okay.
as far as impact angle goes.
All right. And I'm sorry, I don't think I asked you this with regard to double B. Does that photograph fairly and accurately depict the bass boat as you saw it that day when you came up to Ohio?
Yes, with one possible item of discrepancy, and that would be that the precise location of the trolling motor mount and the way it's oriented on the foredeck, that front deck of the bass boat. That wasn't something that was placed in a precise way when I arrived. It looked like it had been broken loose and then just placed there.
Okay. Did you find it in this position when you arrived to look at the boat?
I'm gonna say approximately.
So if I understand it, you and your subcontractor did not place the trolling motor in that position?
I can't tell you for sure for that photograph, but there was a time where we did try to place the trolling motor in what we thought would be its approximate orientation during impact or prior to impact. And we did take some photographs that way.
Let me show you for a second Defendant's Exhibit Double D. Do you recognize that photograph?
I'm not sure I do.
Yeah. Oh, you already gave me permission, didn't you? I'm going to approach that and hand you so you can look at it in person. Defendant's Exhibit Double D.
All right, sir.
You recognize that photograph?
Yes, sir.
That appears to be someone taking measurements of the height of the trolling motor. Is that right?
Yes, sir.
Did you folks take those sort of measurements when you were there?
Yes, sir.
And does that picture fairly and accurately depict what you saw on the trolling motor as you measured it?
Yes, sir.
This is Defendant's Exhibit Double E. Do you recognize that photograph?
Yes, sir.
And tell us, please, what that photograph depicts.
It's a view of the bass boat standing just in front of the bow, looking pretty much straight down the center toward the aft end. We can see the effect of the crumpling of the aluminum on the port side of the bass boat in this photo, how it's bulged out. And to some degree it's there on the starboard side as well. On the port side of the bass boat, near the bow, there's a curved section that actually is where that part of the bass boat conformed to the curvature of the hull of the bayliner during what we would refer to as maximum engagement.
And would maximum engagement be when these boats sort of spun around after the initial impact?
It would be as they started to spin around and there was a contact along a fairly broad area of each vessel. And the bass boat, to some degree, you can think of it as wrapped itself around the side of the bow of the bayliner.
And I think you said earlier the bayliner continued on, correct?
Beyond initial contact, it continued to progress relative to the bass boat some distance, yes.
Okay. And does Defendant's Exhibit Double E fairly and accurately depict the scene of the bass tracker as you saw it when you came to Ohio?
Yes.
Now, was there anything from what you observed in the scanning that you did that made you able to render an opinion to a reasonable degree of engineering certainty as to whether or not the bayliner actually went over top of the fast tracker?
Yes, sir. I had some conclusions about that.
Okay, can you tell us about those, please?
Yes, sir. It was clear to me that the bayliner did not travel over the top of the bass boat.
What are you basing that on?
Oh, there's a series of things. Some of the most obvious ones are that there wasn't damage to the bottom of the hull of the bayliner that would be consistent with that. Similarly, there wasn't any striations or material transfer on the top surfaces of the bass boat along the gunnels where that contact would have been to indicate that there was an override.
And is that opinion to a reasonable degree of engineering certainty?
Yes, sir.
I'm going to hand you what we've marked as Defendant's Exhibit Double F.
Take a second, if you would, and then tell me if you recognize that.
Yes, sir, I recognize it.
Can you tell us, please, what that is?
This is the report that I submitted to Lynn Merrill's office following my investigation.
And does that report summarize your investigation that you've conducted and testified about here this morning?
Yes, sir.
Do you reach certain conclusions in that report?
Yes, sir.
Are each of those conclusions reached to a reasonable degree of engineering certainty?
Yes, sir.
Now, conclusion one has to do with the bass tracker, and you conclude that it's in violation of Rule 15, correct?
So let me catch up to you here.
No problem.
Yes, sir.
And so as not to reinvent the wheel, is that what you've already described to us about this this crossing situation with the bayliner being on the starboard side of the bass tracker?
Yes, sir.
Conclusion two has to do with the bass tracker being the give-way vessel and the bayliner being the stand-on vessel, correct?
Yes, sir.
And is that also what you testified to earlier based upon the relative positions with the bayliner being on the starboard side?
Yes, sir.
I want to turn, if I can, to the next page to conclusion 4.
Yes, sir, I'm with you.
All right. Do you have an opinion to a reasonable degree of engineering certainty as to how the gash in the bayliner that you talked to us about and showed us earlier was created?
Yes, sir.
Can you tell us what that is, please?
It's, as I described here, it's consistent with the discussion we had earlier about how the gash lengthened as the depth of penetration increased of the bow of the bass boat.
And you have a section headed cause of accident. Do you see that?
Yes, sir.
You mentioned in the second paragraph that the bass tracker was either stationary or moving very slowly.
Yes,
Correct?
sir. That's right.
And is that based upon the things that you told us about today as far as the striations?
Yes, sir. And to some degree, areas where there's a lack of striations.
Now, you've also mentioned that there's a regulation that each vessel on the water is required to proceed safely, correct?
Yes, sir.
So does that include both vessels in this case?
Yes, are you referring to basically the rules in the beginning of the NAV rules, which discuss the fact that each operator has a responsibility to take whatever action is necessary to avoid a collision?
Yes.
Yes, sir, we've discussed that.
And so would the bass tracker have an obligation to try to avoid a collision as well?
Yes, sir.
And Is that opinion to a reasonable degree of engineering certainty?
Yes, sir, it is, and it's consistent with the navigation rules and requirements.
Just a second here.
You may.
I want to jump back, if we can, to the previous page. Do you see conclusion 3 there?
Yes, sir.
You have an opinion about additional lighting, correct?
Yes, sir.
Is that opinion also to a reasonable degree of engineering certainty?
Yes, sir.
Can you tell us what that opinion is and what it's premised upon?
The bass boat, according to certain witness statements, was displaying a additional light on the aft end of the bass boat that was described as a lantern in some reports. So it was described as a fairly bright light that was placed in the aft end of the bass boat. And this light could have made, and I believe would have made, recognition of the bass boat by the operator of the bay lantern more difficult.
How so?
When a person stares into a bright light at night, it can make it difficult to see things that are around that light. I believe the brightness of that lantern would have made it difficult for someone some distance away looking at the bass boat from, say, the location of where the bay lantern was, make it difficult to see the bow lights, for example.
Could that lantern be confused with another light source?
Yes, it could be easily confused with what we refer to as background lighting, lights on the shore, the street lights, dock lighting.
Is that one of the reasons why boats are required to have, besides the white 360 light, also to have starboard and port lights?
It certainly helps in that regard. One of the purposes for the red and green bow light is to assist in the determination of which side of the vessel you're looking at night and which way it's pointed, which way its direction of travel is. So if you only see the all-around white light, it's difficult to tell which way a vessel is pointing and therefore which direction it's traveling.
I'm not going to ask you, unless you think you know the specifics, but do you know if there are regulations concerning the requirements for visibility of those lights in terms of distances?
Yes, there are.
And you mentioned earlier that you worked at Underwriter Laboratory, correct?
Yes, sir.
Are there procedures where you can test to determine if those lights meet those legal requirements, that is, for how many nautical miles from which they must be seen?
Yes, sir.
Speaking of underwriters, was there also an underwriter's study about confusion? You talked earlier about confusion between the lantern source and lights on the shore.
Yes, sir.
Objection.
Basis.
Nothing in the report, nothing in his background says anything about this.
Sustained.
If I may, I don't know that he has to list every single authority on which he applies. It's buttressing a conclusion that is.
I'm sorry.
Could you, for
Oh,
Kathy.
I'm sorry, forgive me. I don't know that there's anything that requires him to list every single authority upon which he relies. He does have to give opinions and conclusions, and he's done that, and this study buttresses that conclusion.
May I see the report? It's difficult for me to make a ruling
Well,
when I don't have the opinion that's being tendered.
Do you have that opinion with you, or that study with you, or do you not?
I do not have a copy with me, no, sir.
His report.
Oh, I'm sorry. I thought you were asking for the study. Forgive me.
I have the report, I don't have the study you're talking about.
May I see counsel?
Counsel, you may proceed.
Want to talk to you with reference to your conclusion about the lantern. There was an underwriter study done concerning these other lights on boats, other than what's required by the navigation rules, correct?
Objection.
When I worked for the Marine
Hold on
Department,
one second. Rephrase.
In connection with conclusion number 3, the lantern, have you seen any studies where this particular subject of confusion has been studied?
I've seen related studies
You've seen,
that I believe cover the same basic issue.
I didn't know what you said, what kind of studies?
Related studies
Related studies? Done by who?
done by the Marine Department of Underwriters Laboratories and sponsored by the Coast Guard.
And what was the general subject area being studied?
Nighttime visibility of navigation lights on recreational boats.
And did the study report anything in terms of other light sources and the possibility of confusing voters?
The study noted that the all-round white light of a vessel is easily confused with background lighting, which is lighting on the shore.
That's all I have, thank you.
Attorney Counsel Lemons.
Thanks, Your Honor. Good morning, Mr. Beam.
Good morning.
My name is Dawn Cantala Mesa, and I'm one of the prosecutors on this case, okay?
Yes, ma'am.
I'm going to be asking you a few questions. First, I had some questions about what you reviewed. And with regard to your background, you You don't have any law enforcement experience, do you?
No, ma'am.
No. Were you ever in the Coast Guard?
No, ma'am.
So you never had to patrol the waters or enforce any of these navigation rules?
No, ma'am.
Did you help in writing any of these navigation rules?
No, ma'am.
And you're not a lawyer, that's right?
No, ma'am.
Now, did you look at, you mentioned the U.S. Coast Guard navigation rules. Did you ever compare those to the Ohio regulations with regard to boating laws?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, so you did look at something else other than the U.S. Coast Guard navigation rules.
Yes, ma'am.
You didn't write that in your attachment A, that you reviewed that. Did you review other things besides what was listed in attachment A?
If it wasn't mentioned, it's either because it was submitted and I became aware of it later in the investigation to where it wasn't something that I relied on to form my conclusions and opinions.
Okay, so you didn't use the Ohio rules to form your conclusions, is that right?
That's right.
Did you go to Berlin Reservoir while you were here inspecting the boats?
No, ma'am.
Okay, so you didn't go check out the scene of the crime, essentially, where this collision occurred?
I have seen it, but I did not see it that trip.
Okay. Did you take any measurements on previous trips at Berlin Reservoir of the opening under the causeway or the measurement from the bridge to the no-wake buoys, anything like that?
No, ma'am.
Did you take any measurements on any previous trips as to how deep the reservoir is?
No, ma'am.
I'm going to show you. What is it up there?
I don't know. I think so.
Yeah, sure.
You may.
Can I see your exhibit there? Just, can I see this exhibit? Thank you. I turn it back to the page you had. Take that back?
Is it there now?
No. Hand you what I've marked as State's Exhibit 116, just so we can be sure what we're looking at. Do you recognize that?
Yes, ma'am.
And what is that?
It's attachment A, list of items reviewed.
And that's a list of items you reviewed in preparation for your report?
Yes, ma'am.
And did you type this? Or did you create this?
I created a list.
Okay. You obviously didn't create the things that you used in order to type this list, right?
I don't understand the question.
Okay, so you created this list of items, but it's based on what Attorney Morrow sent you, is that correct?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. On this list, you list an interview with the witness Robert Cease. And you list that under number 1 and number 5. Do you see that?
Yes, ma'am.
Did you ever review an interview of Destin Cease?
I reviewed the notes from the interviews that were provided as part of the DNR documentation.
Okay. So Was that interview in there, is what I'm asking.
I don't recall if it was or not.
What about notes from an interview of James Miller? Did you review that?
I don't recall that name.
Okay. On your attachment, you also list some dates of October 1st, 2015. Do you see that on item number 2, statement of Melissa Navy?
Yes, ma'am, I see it.
Is that a date that you're referring to, or is that an additional interview that was done on October 1st, 2015?
That date would likely have been the date that was given on the documentation, the way the DNR presented it.
Okay.
They typically would do an interview, write a summary,
Okay.
and the summary would typically say something like, summary of interview conducted with the person's name and on this date.
Okay. It's not, you didn't go do separate interviews of these people?
No, ma'am, I did not do direct interviews of any of the witnesses or the people involved.
All right. You looked at the reconstruction of a two-boat collision prepared by Richard McCullough. Do you remember that?
I looked at the reports that were completed by various DNR officers. I
Okay.
don't recall specifically the names of the officers at the bottom of the pages of which name was associated with which report.
Okay.
There were
Did
several
you-
reports.
And under item number 9, you list Bruce Lindemood's statement. You see that?
Yes, ma'am.
Did you review both of his statements, if you recall?
If it was part of the DNR report, I would have reviewed it.
Okay. Did you review any 911 calls, any audio 911 calls?
I don't recall. I was provided with some audio recordings by Ms. Merrill's office. And I don't recall if there was a 911 recording in there or not.
Okay. You do list, however, audio from interviews with Yurich after the accident. You did list those, right?
What's the number? I don't remember.
Number 15 on your list.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, so you listened to those audio files.
Yes, ma'am.
Did you review any BCI reports with regard to this
Can
case?
you clarify?
It's Ohio Bureau of Criminal Identification. They would have been as a result of testing that was done. Did you review any of those reports? They would have had the Attorney General's heading on them.
And what was the subject of those reports? What would they have been testing?
DNA, light bulbs, serology.
I do remember reviewing some reports that related to the testing of evaluation of navigation light filaments.
Okay.
I'm sorry, navigation. light.
Navigation light filaments.
Okay, that's not included on your attachment, though. Is that right?
If it was part of one of the DNR reports, I would have considered it to be covered by mentioning the DNR report that included it.
Okay. Then, is that the same as the photographs? Did you see the ODNR photographs? Were those included for your review? It was about 300 some odd photographs on the disc.
Yes, ma'am. I reviewed a lot of photographs from the DNR.
Okay. You don't recall if you specifically reviewed the ODNR photographs?
I reviewed a lot of photographs that were identified as taken by the DNR, yes.
Okay. Did you, on this attachment, you also list, on number 17 and 18, the U.S. Coast Guard report research you've done and the navigation rules, is that correct?
Yes, ma'am.
All right. Where in this list do you list this magazine that you supposedly reviewed?
I don't see it here. I did draft and submit a supplement.
You did?
Yes.
Oh, and do you have that with you today, a supplement?
I don't have it with my papers here. I did submit it to Ms. Merrill's office.
And when did you submit that?
It was after this report.
Okay.
It was issued as a supplement when I became aware of.
So that was sometime after June 15th of 2017?
Yes, ma'am.
And was that a supplement to your report? Did it change your report? Did you put new items in your report?
Yes, ma'am. It affected the information that I was able to ascertain regarding potential planing speed of the Bayliner.
You know, may we approach?
You may.
Let's take 10 or 15 minutes.
All rise. Court is in recess.
Here still, or does the judge have that? At one point, he had it. Here it is.
may be seated. Let the record reflect that I have had an opportunity to review the supplement to the report that was prepared by Miles Bean. I have provided a copy of that supplement to counsel for the state of Ohio, Attorney Cancela Mesa.
Your Honor, the state requests that we move to strike any portion of Mr. Bean's testimony with regard to his minimum planing speed of 10 to 13 miles per hour that he testified before on direct. First of all, that part was not in any of his reports. It was my plan to just ask him about it on cross, but now that he's has this whole section where he actually called Bayliner after our trial started, the day Mr. Ford testified and Mr. McCullough testified, got more information from Bayliner, brought in this indication, all this information he got from both tests and both U.S. I'd asked to strike it, Your Honor, as not being a discovery, as not part of his report. It's not anything that we have time to go and discredit at this point. It's prejudicial to the fact that we don't have any time to go see if this has any clout, to see if we could discredit these numbers, to see if we could look and see if there's any other places that these could be found in order to ask this witness about these numbers.
Thank
I
you.
can't even properly cross-examine the witness about it.
Attorney Uhas, Attorney Morrow, any reply?
Thank you, Your Honor. Mr. Bean's original report indicated that he disagreed with the assessment from Mr. McCullough's report with regard to planing. Mr. McCullough's report, in part, relied upon a phone call he made to Bayliner about minimum planing speed. This email appears to have been received by us yesterday on the 16th, according to the top, and as we indicated at the sidebar, Attorney Uhas and I opened this email, did not realize it was a supplemental report. We thought it was an email with additional information for us for trial preparation to review with him. He is an engineer. They knew he was an engineer from the inception of us disclosing him, did not hire an engineer to refute any engineering standards. What this supplement does is simply buttress it's additional authority to buttress his original opinion that he does not believe you can say to a reasonable degree of engineering certainty this boat was unplanned. For those reasons, one, I do not believe there's prejudice to the state. They were aware that was his opinion. He specifically in his report indicates the ODNR report is flawed in its methodology. I think it is entirely reasonable and consistent for an expert in engineering to keep reading journals and articles and seeking out additional information. It is labeled supplement to his report, and for that reason, Sunday morning when I read it, I should have read it more thoroughly and produced it when we got here this morning. It was an oversight. I thought the email was to provide additional information to counsel to review for a trial. But they knew there was an engineer testifying, so as far as refuting the calculations and numbers, I don't believe their choice to not hire an engineer prior to trial should now be an issue to claim prejudice. And again, his initial report very clearly indicates he did not agree with the methodology of the state's expert on the planing.
I've had a chance to review the original report dated June 15th of 2017 that has been marked as Defendant's Exhibit FF. And again, for the purpose of the record, I'm going to mark this supplement that is now under discussion if counsel has no objection, as court exhibit number 1. I think, reviewing it, that the court exhibit number 1 does more than provide additional authority for the opinion. It, in fact, adds an additional conclusion or opinion that was not contained in the original report. There is reference that the DNR spoke with the Bayliner tech, who said that they could not provide a minimum planing speed. I agree with Attorney Morrow that Mr. Beam has testified that the data relied on by the state's expert to render an opinion is flawed, but there's nothing in Mr. Beam's original report that references the conclusions reached in this supplement, specifically the time to 30 miles per hour at 10.9 seconds, the time to plane at 3.8 seconds, and the conclusion that the estimated speed of the boat in 3.8 seconds is approximately 10.5 miles per hour. So Rule 16K requires that the written report and summary of qualifications of an expert shall be subject to disclosure no later than 21 days prior to trial, and that failure to disclose the written report to opposing counsel shall preclude the expert's testimony. As it relates to this additional supplement and the conclusions reached in it, I am going to sustain the state's motion to strike that portion of the testimony from trial and not permit any testimony regarding or contained in this supplement that's been marked as Court Exhibit 1. Attorney Cancelo Mesa, you may proceed.
Thank you, Your Honor. Mr. Beam, did you review any weather reports with regard to the date in question, May 9th, 2015?
Not weather reports, but I did make note of the weather-related check boxes on the DNR's reports where they noted visibility, wind, weather, waves, so forth, temperature.
And do you recall what the weather conditions were according to the DNR reports?
They indicated the clear visibility, winds were calm.
Did the DNR reports indicate a time of the collision?
Yes, I believe they did.
Do you recall what time they said it was?
It was after midnight.
Okay, so it's dark outside, correct?
Yes.
Did you review any, I don't know what it would be called, like a water level report or anything that's produced to show whether the water was rising or lowering in that Berlin Reservoir, anything like that?
No, ma'am.
Okay. What about any coroner's reports? Did you review those?
I don't recall.
Okay. What about coroner's photographs? Did you review any of that?
No.
Miles, I need you to speak up. I'm losing there.
No, I didn't review those.
When you're doing an accident reconstruction, you're trying to recreate that same situation that happened during the collision, isn't that correct?
Well, reconstruction is a term that we use in our world for understanding what happened and being able to study the evidence to see what happened.
Okay. And being on the water is a lot different situation than it would be being on a roadway, correct?
Yes, ma'am.
There's
In what
no,
regards specifically are you asking about, though?
well, like, there's no skid marks on the water, like, you can't measure skid marks or see exactly where something occurred.
Object to the form of the question.
Isn't that correct?
Overruled.
Go ahead.
As an expert in analyzing boat collisions and establishing relationships of impact between two vessels, I would say that the skid marks, if you want to call it that, are on the boats themselves.
Okay, so there's nothing on the, like, there's nothing on the waterway, you know, that you're measuring.
There's nothing permanent that's left behind. In the short term, there's some wreckage on top a lot of times, and there may be pieces of boats or even an entire vessel that is sunk near the point of impact.
But you don't have any information, do you, that there was anything like that in this situation?
In regards to sinking of a vessel or any debris pulled from the bottom, is that what you're referring to?
Yes.
No, I don't have any of that.
Most of your conclusions in your report have to do with the navigation rules, don't they?
Many of them do, yes.
Okay. Do you have to be an engineer to understand those navigation rules?
I don't believe so, ma'am.
And in fact, there are a lot of law enforcement officers who have to enforce those navigation rules who aren't engineers, correct?
I would say so, yes.
When you talked about Navigation Rule 15, did you look to see if Ohio has a comparable Rule 15
Yes,
with
ma'am.
regard to crossing situations?
I did.
And do they?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Now, does a crossing situation with regard to a Navigation Rule 15 apply to vessels in sight of each other?
Yes, ma'am.
And are vessels at night considered in sight of each other?
I want to ask you to rephrase your original question.
Okay. Is nighttime, let me ask it this way. When it is nighttime, is there a different set of rules with regard to navigation? Not a different set, but maybe you might look to supplementing those rules or looking at the general responsibility rule.
The biggest difference regarding nighttime is the requirements for displaying the appropriate navigation lights.
Did you see in what you reviewed multiple witnesses who talked about the navigation lights on the Bass Tracker being on?
Objection.
Overruled.
There were comments made by some of the witnesses regarding navigation lights being on.
Okay. And you said you saw that BCI report with regard to the filament testing of light bulbs from the Bass Tracker,
Yes, ma'am.
and those appear to be working light bulbs, correct?
Objection.
I don't recall the specifics of the report. I did review it at the time.
Okay. When you have a crossing situation with regard to Navigation Rule 15, does that apply at nighttime if you have vessels that aren't in sight of each other?
To my knowledge, the rule applies
Okay.
regardless of whether you're in sight of another.
When you're on the waterway at night and can only see a navigation lights of another vessel, can you tell whether that vessel is crossing or not?
Yes, ma'am.
You can? What do you do to tell that?
If you're in a situation where another vessel is crossing or is to your starboard side, you will see the red portion of the navigation of the red green light on the
Okay.
bow. You will see the red side. If you are the giveaway vessel, you will see the red. A lot of times that's taught as, you see the red, that indicates danger. That means you need to get out of the way.
Okay. Does that apply in every situation? Should the vessel to the port side of the starboard vessel always give way to that starboard side vessel?
Objection.
Overruled. Can you give me a specific scenario?
Okay, let's say in our situation, can you see that screen all right?
Yes, ma'am.
We have the bass tracker, right?
Yes, ma'am.
And you have the bay liner coming. Is it always that the bass tracker should give way if this is a crossing situation? Is that absolute right that he has to stop and give way to this vessel?
I'm not aware that Rule 15 states any differently.
Okay. What about if say this isn't a bass tracker, say this is a big freighter in Lake Yurich. Does a big freighter have to make way or give the right of way to this little bay liner
Objection.
coming in this direction?
Objection.
To the original question, I certainly know where this is going. It's overruled.
Go ahead.
There are a number of clauses and explanations in NAV rules that apply to
Could you keep your voice up? I'm sorry.
situations that could be covered by what you're describing.
So you're saying there's fallback rules, right?
Saying there's rules that could cover situations as what you're mentioning.
Okay. And one of those, you already mentioned that general responsibility rule. That's in the navigation rules as well, right?
Please refresh my memory.
Well, you've mentioned before that all boats have a duty to act responsible on the waterway, to look out where they're going, to maintain a safe speed, and be responsible on the water. Is that correct?
Did I say all that today? Are you saying? I don't recall.
I don't know if it was in those words.
I'm sorry, Counselor. I'm just having a hard time remembering what you're saying I said.
What is Rule 2?
I don't recall the specific wording. Could I see it?
You may.
It's in Handy States Exhibit 117. I'm sorry, it's not bound there. Do you recognize that?
Yes, ma'am.
Can you tell us what that is?
The cover says navigation rules and regulations handbook.
And is that part of what you reviewed in order to write your conclusions in your report?
I reviewed the navigation rules that were published on, I believe I referenced a site in my list of attachments
Okay.
that were on a Coast Guard site.
And is that from there? Does that look familiar?
I I'm aware that the Coast Guard publishes a book that has the NAV rules in it.
Okay. And you can't tell that that's printed from that website? That that's that same website and location you gave on your report? Do you need some help?
Yeah, it's a bit unwieldy.
There.
I just want to look at the first few pages if I might.
Okay. Let me take the rest. Okay.
May I see counsel when the witness is looking for that? For the record, there is significantly more cross-examination, so I think it's a good opportunity for our noon recess. We'll see everyone back here at 1:15.
All right.